Your affirmative team is AA011. That's Hattie and Ben, Hattie and Ben. And then your negative team is AE010. It's Lyvia and Anya, LYVIA, ANYA. All right, competitors, let me introduce you judges. This is, glad you made it. You just barely had time to come up for air, didn't you?
I went completely the wrong way, so that's
easy doing it. So this is Megan Ruska, is that correct? Ruska. And would you share your paradigm, please?
Sure, so I'm a policy analyst looking for real-world impacts.
Sitting next to Megan is Dylan Connor. Do you have a paradigm?
Policymaker.
Awesome. That's Mr. Henshaw.
Mine is I'm looking at delivery performance total package.
Awesome. Okay, this is Reinking.
Policymaker and also like pragmatic, and I do not like spreading. I like it to be able to flow everything.
And Thomas Smith.
I'm a traditional, so stock issues.
Good.
So I'm sorry, but you're looking for real world impacts, you're a policymaker, and then were you delivery or performance? You're a policymaker, no spreading, and then were you a stock stretch? Alright, thank you.
Good guys? Judges, are you ready?
Can we have all cell phones turned off?
Please, that's a great idea. Please do.
Why is
And
it
then
okay
no
to be
texting
on
during
for
rounds, all right?
Airplane mode. Airplane mode.
Thank you, Mr. Henshaw. And then at the end of the round, I'm going to come back and pick up the 5 ballots, so you don't have to walk wherever you can go. So don't disclose or any of that. And then I'll take them, and then we'll have a little surprise the award ceremony. Good luck, guys. No,
It's really surprising.
enjoy this. Well, this is nice. This is icing on the cake, right? Have a good round. Good luck. See you. And don't forget to return those chairs.
Are all my judges ready? Opponents? Ben?
One sec.
Yeah, take a lunch.
Sorry.
Okay, then I'll begin. The United States faces a growing threat to its people and their rights. This threat is human trafficking. Vulnerable people are stolen from their homes, taken to a foreign country without legal status, and forced into slave-like conditions or prostitution. The federal government created the T visa, which attempts to grant these victims legal status and further services, but harsh restrictions mean only a small number of immigrants who need help get it. Because of this, Ben and I provide the following case for the United States federal government, substantially reducing restrictions on legal immigration. Contention 1, harms. A. Human trafficking is a growing threat throughout the United States, destroying tens of thousands of lives. Kay Granger, U.S. House of Representatives member, 2017. Adults and youth are being forced into prostitution and unpaid labor in our own backyard at an alarming rate. No community in America is immune to the scourge of human trafficking. The trafficking of people is the fastest growing criminal industry in the world. Human trafficking has become a major human rights crisis that is overwhelming the limited number of resources of our local law enforcement agencies and destroying the lives of a generation of victims. Incidents of human trafficking in the United States saw a 35.7% increase in 2016. Texas is among the top 2 states for trafficking because of its relative proximity to the border. B. Human trafficking is a fundamental violation of human rights. United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner, 14. Human rights law has unequivocally proclaimed the fundamental immorality of one person appropriating another, has decried forced labor, debt bondage, and sexual exploitation, human rights most relevant to trafficking. The right to liberty, the right not to be submitted to servitude, forced labor, bonded labor. Many practices associated with trafficking are prohibited under human rights. Servitude, sexual exploitation, forced marriage, and forced prostitution. Trafficking itself is a serious violation of human rights. Rights are universal. They apply to everyone. Trafficked persons are entitled to the full range of human rights. States cannot prioritize other considerations, such as immigration control or public order, over the best interests of the victim of trafficking. Not enough is being done to end these terrible conditions people face, as shown in our contention 2, inherency. A. Current restrictions deter victims from getting help. Michael C. Payne, Junior Doctor at University of Kansas School of Law, 2006. Qualified victims are eligible for benefits and services. In order to be eligible, a victim must be classified as a victim of severe form of trafficking in persons. The requirement is troubling. There's an implicit recognition that other forms exist, but legislation makes no attempt to define them. There are situations in which an individual has been victimized but isn't eligible for government benefits. The victim must be certified. The certification must attest that the victim is assist in the prosecution of trafficking. One problem is the demand for assistance in prosecuting traffickers. In theory, the request depends on circumstances. However, there's no guidance in weighing the circumstances, meaning that the needs of law enforcement may tend to outweigh circumstances. These circumstances are subjective criteria that law enforcement officials may discount if they're more eager to prosecute than to assist. An examination of the number of T visas available shows that something is amiss. Only 5,000 visas are available each year, but anywhere between 14,500 and 50,000 victims arrive in the U.S. annually. The visa cap is clearly too low. Between 2000 and 2003, the government only received 757 applicants for T visas, granting only 328. The application process is too difficult. The bureaucratic obstacle force victims must negotiate will either deny benefits or deter them from seeking those benefits. The system currently in place is the functional equivalent of a hospital emergency room that would require individuals who are suffering internal bleeding to prove as much without the benefit of technology, that those same individuals complete a battery of paperwork in a strange language before being admitted by workers who may or may not use arbitrary means of review, and that these individuals assist in his or her own exploratory surgery. B. Victims whose T visas expire or are deported return to their home country and risk being trafficked again. Cherish Adams, The George Washington International Law Review, 2011. A trafficking victim repatriated faces debt bondage and social stigma. A repatriated victim may be intercepted by the trafficking ring. There have been documented cases of victims being quickly re-trafficked. Debt bondage is still keeping them under the control of the traffickers. Traffickers threaten the victim and family if the debt's not repaid. To end these barriers preventing victims from getting support, Ben and I present the following plan. Plan. The United States federal government should remove the restrictions on obtaining the T visa. The severe form of trafficking requirement for eligibility, eliminating the requirement for applicants to work with law enforcement, substantially increasing the cap on visas, and granting lawful permanent residence to visa holders. The plan would be an effective response at solving the harms of human trafficking, as shown in our contention for 3 Solvency. A. Granting T visas to victims is key to solving trafficking. NBC 2017. Indira Karimova became a victim of human trafficking after she was married and brought to the U.S. She was subjected to years of abuse with no lifeline. Karimova was granted a T visa, the sole visa specifically designated for victims of human trafficking. For foreign trafficking victims, the T visas can mean the difference between a new life and slavery. Experts say for foreign victims, being identified as a victim is crucial. B. Removing the requirement that victims suffer a severe form of trafficking and cooperate with law enforcement solves for victims and improves protection. Theodore R. Sangalis, Fordham Law Review, 2011. Congress should modify the requirements for the T visa. When they escape, immediate needs can include physical safety, housing, counseling, immigration relief, and financial resources. But to receive these, individuals must be first identified as a victim of severe form of trafficking, and then must be willing to cooperate with law enforcement. Congress should discard the requirement that victims suffer severe forms of trafficking and allow all victims to obtain T visa relief. Neither of these changes would hinder prosecution. Removing this requirement may encourage more victims to cooperate because the benefits and services they receive give them a sense of safety. Human trafficking is an unethical exploitation of the vulnerable and a complete violation of their rights. So we have a moral obligation to fight this issue, regardless of other impacts, shown in our contention for framing. A. We have a moral obligation to fight human trafficking. Deborah Price, Congresswoman from Ohio, 2006. We have a moral obligation to fight this evil. Trafficking beings is an assault on our most cherished beliefs. A nation that stands for freedom cannot tolerate the exploitation of the innocent. This needs to be a national priority. Human trafficking is a betrayal of one of the most basic obligations of morality, the obligation to defend the innocent. B. Restrictive immigration policies are based off unfounded fear of immigrants that makes them vulnerable. Putting victims first is key. Dalrymple, 2005. Societal prejudices cause us to view immigration as a problem. The public's attitude towards immigrants is often driven by fear. fear of terrorism, of loss of national identity, of rising welfare costs, and of a saturated job market. So governments react to fears by passing politically advantageous but inhumane immigration laws. Attempts to combat trafficking by law enforcement efforts alone are ineffective because such strategies do not address the cause, the needs of the people who are desperate and vulnerable. An effective anti-trafficking strategy must address the needs of the victims. Governments must understand that trafficking violates fundamental human rights. It's for these reasons that I stand in firm affirmation of the result. I am now open for questions.
Okay. Are all our judges ready? And then the opponent ready? Okay, first, can you define what severe trafficking is?
That's the serious problem. Right now, severe is too vague to define, so there's no real exact definition.
So you cannot provide an exact definition of what severe
There is
trafficking
one, but it's very vague. My partner can bring it up in later speeches, but I do not have time.
Okay. And then, do you have a mandate on the number of visas? Is it going to be capped to a specific amount, or is
So
it
you're
unlimited?
asking for how much we're increasing?
Right.
Substantially, so 50,000.
50,000. Okay. And then, under T visas, can people get work permits?
They're granted LPR, so they stay here and they can work.
So they can work here.
Yes.
And then, do victims get social services?
Yes.
Can you specify what kind?
There's many different services. I believe my subpoint B brings it up. There's immigration relief, mental health, for helping these people with mental health issues and housing. Would you like more?
Yeah, could you talk about the housing a little bit more?
They just provide them with different services, and then it depends, of course, on location, because there's also nonprofits that are willing to help out too.
Okay. So for your harm, subpoint A, does it talk about United States citizens that are being affected, or does it talk about foreign people?
It's mainly foreign people.
Okay, but it says that human trafficking is a threat in the United States, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then you mentioned that adults and children were being trafficked right from their own backyards, correct?
Yes, and
So-
taken to the United States.
Okay. And then, so what is the exact number of victims annually? Do you have an estimate, or?
Yes, the estimate as stated in, let's see, harm subpoint A, is about 14, and it's very hard to define, but the estimate's around 14,000 to 50,000.
Okay. And then, does your solvency depend on victims speaking up and seeking help?
Yes, and by removing these restrictions, they will feel more comfortable in speaking out.
Okay, so where would they go to seek help and apply for a T visa?
There's many different things, but if we're applying for a T visa, it's just an application in the mail. They just have to send it to CIS.
So what if their traffickers get the mail and prevent them from actually sending the application?
I think that the chance, once again, there's other ways for them to help. They can just call hotlines. There's people they can just go up to a random person. There's many different ways for them to help, if
Okay.
that's what you're wondering.
Okay, so what if humans that are suffering from the human trafficking are prevented from leaving their houses and don't have any form of communication with the outside world?
I doubt that every single case of human trafficking is where they're completely shut out from the foreign world because they have to work.
Okay, thank you. So if we pass plan and trafficking actually worsens, is it still worth trying because of the moral obligation?
Whatever helps the people for human trafficking, but I find it unlikely that human trafficking will actually worsen.
Okay, thank you.
Would you be willing to flash us your case?
We have a paper copy if you want.
Thank you so much. Could we please use that?
Who's the first negative speaker?
Oh, I'm the first negative speaker. I'm Anya Tang.
Thank you.
thanking people. Oh no, I'm sorry. Okay, I'd like to begin by saying thank you. I'd like to thank Luke and Oliver, the only other Penn policy team. You guys have helped us out a lot, and even though your app ideas have become I'm really grateful for your creativity and your uniqueness. I'd like to thank my coach, Mr. Starkweather. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, I'm being unprofessional. I'd like to thank my coach, Mr. Starkweather, for putting up with me with my neurotic breakdowns and still encouraging me to stay optimistic. I'd like to thank Charlie Connell. She's a judge that gave me my first 30, and I think she's what really inspired me to keep on going with policy debate. I'd like to thank our opponents for being here, and congratulations on making it to finals.
You too.
And I'd like to thank just all of Penn Debate for their consistent support. I would also like to thank my parents, and lastly, I would like to thank my partner. And I'm pretty sure her back does hurt a little bit from carrying me.
I think it's the opposite way around.
And then one last thing. I'd like to thank everyone who otherwise just discouraged me or just didn't believe in me, because being here wouldn't be as satisfying without having them discourage me. Oh yeah, and I'd like to thank Tim Vincent. Okay. Order is 4 op, then case. Do you need me to be more specific?
Yeah, what's the order of case?
Alright, order of case is going to be framing first, then solvency. Am I good with that? And then are my opponents ready?
Judge, the first off-case argument is topicality on substantial. We begin with interpretation. Substantial is at least 10%. That's Mickles 8. The definition of insubstantial is fact-specific. It has found that less than 10% of efforts is insubstantial. However, there are more than There are more than 1 million legal immigrants each year. In fact, legal immigrants to the U.S. number approximately 1 million per year. And so the violation, the plan does not let in a substantial amount. They let in only 50,000%. So as a result, in order to be substantial, they have to let in at least 10% of 1 million. They don't meet. This is a voting issue based upon standards of limits and round. Based on limits, they justify an infinite number of affirmatives, all with squirrely numbers of people that they affect, which not only makes it difficult for us to garner neg round, it means that they could tinker with a scope, target, or means of any of the 1,000 immigration mechanisms, which makes it impossible for the neg to prepare. Now furthermore, on second standard of round, this allows us to spike out of any disad by claiming that they're only a minor reduction. This forces us to rely on generics and prevents topic education. So Judge, topicality is a voter is on clash, as well as fairness and education. So this might I'll be moving on to my second off-case argument. My second off-case argument can be flowed as topicality immigration adjustment of status. Definition: adjustment of status is distinct from legal immigration. That's Cheney and Hassell 12. Adjustment of status is a process that permits aliens already present in the U.S. become LPRs. Because aliens who adjust status are already physically present inside the U.S., the process does not involve physical entry after inspection and authorization at a port of entry. Thus, it is not an admission. Judge, in order for them to meet the resolution, they have to have a physical transfer, a net increase of people coming into the U.S. Their plan doesn't do that because the T visa affects people already in the U.S. That's their first card that they read, saying that people being brought to the U.S. are eligible for T visas. Because of this, this explodes limits because there are over 40 different ways to adjust status. That's the USCIS 2018. The INA and certain other federal laws provide over 40 different ways for foreign nationals to adjust status to lawful permanent residence. So not only does this explode round and explode neg limits, we says this is also a voter for clash, education, and fairness. Thus, Judge, before you weigh any other impact or any other contention in the round, you must weigh topicality first. You must ask yourself, does the affirmative even affirm the resolution? Which in this case, they most certainly do not. So this is mine, I'll be moving on to my first off-case argument. Judge, you can flow this for the deficit DA. We begin with uniqueness. The deficit is stable now by Trump's new plan. That's the White House in 2018. The president reduced the deficit and the budget reduced the deficit by $3 trillion, which is one of the largest in history. Now furthermore, Going to the link, increasing T visas allows for more people to access benefits. That's still in 17. The US implemented the TVPA in 2000, and however, the TVPA led to the creation of the T visa. And so as a result, the T visa can also provide access to social services, healthcare, and medical programs. Judge, there's solvency banks on this. Don't let them get away with saying that they're not going to link to this DA. Now, furthermore, the impact, vote neg because the threshold for the link and the impact is low, because even small changes in readiness, because even small changes in the deficit tier are going to hurt our economy. So this meant I'll be moving on to the last off-case argument. That's a shutdown DA. Beginning with the uniqueness, Democrats and Republicans have temporarily partnered with each other to reopen the government for 3 weeks. In fact, a fragile alliance is in the making, and any substantial changes right now will shatter this bipartisan cooperation. That's Anya and Haberna in 2019. The procedural move by Senators McConnell and Schumer is the first time the parties have agreed to do virtually anything since the shutdown began on December 22nd. Friday is likely to come and go without action to end the shutdown. However, in a surprise move, the two parties work together, Judge. So we see that to continue with this card, the government is reopened for 3 weeks. So we have 3 weeks to pass a new funding bill. However, the plan completely wrecks this. I'll be moving on to my link. The AF kills any chance at the shutdown resolution by suddenly polarizing the government with their substantial immigration reform, which puts them in a double bind. Judge, they either concede that they aren't substantial and don't link to our shutdown DA, or they either concede the link to the shutdown DA by claiming that they are in fact substantial. That's gross 19. The roots of the shutdown can be traced to immigration. Polarization on immigration is enormous. These differences give leaders little reason to want to compromise. The 2018 election left the GOP with fewer centrists willing to compromise. They'll need cover from Trump, but he seems unwilling to provide. Democrats and Republicans are miles apart. For the internal link, the prolonged shutdown collapses the economy. That's a Gregorian in 19. If the shutdown lasts, the devastating impact will be widespread. Food stamps, eviction, last inspections, and stock market plummets. If the standoff persists and Congress can't reach a deal, you'll have a pretty severe recession. You can start seeing some pretty dark scenarios worldwide. Now, Judge, the impact is that the prolonged shutdown will end food stamps, condemning over 40 million people to starvation along the lines of race, class, and ability. Judge, if you vote AF, you perpetuate the structural violence. You deny them something that could easily be provided by voting neg. With that in mind, that's Golshan 19. As the shutdown drags on, millions of America's most vulnerable are in danger of being left to go hungry. The Department of Agriculture is guaranteeing funding for SNAP through February. After that, the agency doesn't have a game plan to support the more than 38 million people on the program. Millions of Americans could see a cut to their food aid. The shutdown threatens the livelihoods of the poorest Americans. The majority of American adults receiving benefits live far below the poverty line, and most of them are children, older adults, or disabled people. So what this DA is saying is that if you do pass a plan, you link to the government shutdown, because right now we have 3 weeks to come with a solution. Right now we have 3 weeks for the Democrats and the Republicans to work together to come to a bipartisan solution. If you pass a plan, you polarize the government, you split them apart, and this leads to the fact that over 40 million Americans are not going to get the food aid that they need. And Judge, that's structural violence. That's denying someone something that they could easily receive. You're denying someone basic rights based upon a government shutdown by passing the act. Thus, Judge, you must vote neg based upon this. So with this in mind, I'll be moving on to case. I'll begin with just one attack on framing. Any risk that the act solves, extinction as well as utilitarian impacts completely outweighs. Because we have to look forward to future populations. That's Bostrom in 2013. What makes existential catastrophes especially bad is that they would destroy the future. Judge, refer back to my shutdown DA and its impacts. You stated that you're a pragmatist judge. You must vote on this shutdown DA because of its wide-reaching impacts and its impact on future generations as well. To continue with the card, we must consider how much value would come to exist in this absence. Even if we use the most conservative of these estimates, we find that the expected loss of an existential catastrophe is greater than the value of 10 to the 15 human lives. Judge, clearly you must weigh this round based upon utilitarian impacts, and even if you choose not to, we still win our shutdown DA based upon their own framing. So with this in mind, I'm going to be moving on to solvency. I have just one attack that's Baker 19. The lack of solid data makes it hard to craft an appropriate response. With this in mind, we find that their numbers not only fail to meet the definition for substantial, they have no idea how many immigrants that they could solve for. Furthermore, Baker 19 also states that in popular imagination, trafficked women tend to be foreigners brought to the U.S. against their will. In fact, many are American-born women and girls. In fact, according to the Department of Justice statistics, about a quarter of victims are white, a quarter Hispanic, and 40% African-American. Judge, we find that trafficking is alive and well in the U.S., and giving them an adjustment of status, first off, isn't even topical, and second off, hard, we find that if we do pass this plan, we're not going to solve for anything because human trafficking persists in the US. The US is not some beautiful haven. In fact, passing the plan is simply not going to solve. And so with this in mind, I can only see a vote in negation. Thank you. I'm voting for cross.
Can you time?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Is everybody ready? Alright, then I'll begin. So you have first off for the shutdown disadvantage. Where in your link does it say that the T visa plan is contentious, or just T visas in general?
Our link is based upon immigration. Any immigration
Any
reform is going to
immigration?
polarize, yes.
Okay. And then, so you read Baker 19. First of all, it says it's hard to create response because exact data is unknown.
Yes, meaning either you cannot determine how much solvency you can claim.
Okay. And then you also said, how can not knowing by exact solvency do you mean the numbers of people being helped?
Absolutely. Not only that, we mean the number of people in human trafficking.
Okay. And then in Baker 19, what percentage of human trafficked people are American? Because I heard a lot of things about their rights, but I didn't hear anything about American citizens.
We can provide more evidence for that in the Twincy. Right now, we don't have a statistic.
Okay. Are you going to read any more on case?
Any more on-case arguments?
Yes.
Yes.
And anything impacting to Newport?
Anything impacting to Newport? No, I'm sorry.
Okay. So on to framing, your only argument was extinction outweighs from Bolstrom 18, correct?
We're saying that you should evaluate the round based upon a utilitarian framework.
Because extinction outweighs human rights.
Absolutely. Furthermore, even if we do choose to go by your framing, our shutdown DA still wins on that framing.
Okay, because of the snaps. Also, for the deficit disadvantage, did you have a card for your impact hurting the economy?
We did not have a card for that. We simply reread the link card because any change, no matter how small, is going to trigger the impact.
And deficit. Okay. So would you say if there's no change in deficit, will it hurt the economy?
If there's no change in deficit at the moment, then the uniqueness is going to persist. Right now, the status quo is fine.
Can I see your link for that?
Our link. Yeah, here you go.
So it's just saying it's increasing the amount of people who get benefits?
Absolutely.
That's it?
Passing the plan allows for these T visa people to be eligible for social benefits, at least to the impact of our DA.
So that's what the card's saying, like people who get T visas get benefits. All right. And then, can I get your qualifications for your immigrant is adjusting status? TAOS?
TAOS?
For immigration is...
Oh, yeah. So this is from Attorney Advisors of the Immigration Court, and it's from www.justice.gov, a government website.
Okay, and date?
It's from 2012.
Okay, and then Michael's 8 for T substantial?
T substantial.
It's talking about effort, correct?
Do you want a qualification for that?
Yeah, but also it's just talking about 10% in effort.
10% in effort? No, it means 10%, and we provided...
Can I see it?
Yeah, sure. The definition of insubstantial is fact-specific. It has been found that less than 10% of efforts is insubstantial. So in terms of efforts, we're talking about immigrants that you affect.
We'll take some time. So the order will be briefly extending inherency and harms. Then moving on to solvency, then framing, then T substantial, then TEAOS, adjustment of status, then the deficit dysad, then the shutdown. Oh, but before I start, some thank yous. First of all, I'd like to thank the CHS, Speaker Big coaching staff, mostly, primarily our policy coach, Mr. Lowry, also known as the Big L. I'd like to thank my teammates. Having been to tournaments without any teammates, it's super depressing. You guys are what makes this fun, even you, Shay. And the CHS administration for helping support our program. Without them, we probably wouldn't have even made it to the tournament because there was a 2-hour delay at school Friday. Of course, my family for their love and support, and the fact without them, I wouldn't exist. And most of all, my partner, Hattie, who last summer when we were like, holy crap, I need a partner, and I asked her fresh out of LD, not knowing anything about policy, she has learned so much and picked up so much, and her hard work and commitment and improvement over the past year has just blown me away. So, thank you. All right. Is everyone ready? Then I'll begin. Starting off with harms. This was completely conceded by the neck, so flow through adult trafficking is an increasing threat to the status quo and is a fundamental violation of the human rights of these people. Now moving on to inherency. There are 4 main restrictions that prevent the T visa from solving trafficking that are AFRA moves. First of all is the severe form of trafficking requirement, which limits out many victims whose experience may not be considered severe, but nonetheless need help. Second is the requirement that victims cooperate with prosecution efforts before obtaining a visa. This puts victims at the mercy of prosecutors and creates a chilling effect where victims fear law enforcement before they have legal status. Third is the cap, which limits T visas to 5,000 a year when estimates say 3 to 10 times that many are trafficked annually. And fourth, the visa is temporary, which when it expires results in repatriation to the home country and puts victims in the same vulnerable spot they began, leading to re-trafficking. By making that permanent, we solve for that. They have completely conceded our inherent barrier and that these restrictions currently are the main problems that these people face. Now moving on to solvency. Extender subpoena. Giving these people legal status is key to saving them from trafficking. Without legal status, they are defenseless. And extender subpoint B, St. Gallus evidence that removing the restrictions mentioned in our inherency brings these people the access to key social services they need to get help and makes them more likely to prosecute traffickers later on. They only have one argument on this flow, saying that lack of data prevents us from solving. However, first of all, we make data access easier. If more victims are speaking out because these restrictions are removed, then we get a better idea of what's happening to these people. And second of all, the card also mentions how many Americans are also trafficked. We solve for Americans being trafficked indirectly. Because more foreign victims are being helped and speaking out, it's much less profitable for the traffickers. And also, they are more likely to prosecute traffickers post-plan. This all helps destroy trafficking rings overall, which helps all victims of trafficking, not just foreign ones. Now moving on to framing. Extend our price evidence. Fighting trafficking is a moral priority. It involves the exploitation and loss of freedom and human rights of innocent people. And extend the Dalrymple evidence. Anti-immigrant rhetoric is based off unfounded fears that ignore the plight of many immigrants, and that instead we need to focus on putting victims of exploitation first. If we win that human trafficking is a moral issue that must come first, then any risk we can help people in this situation is enough to vote F and outweighs any disadvantages. Judge, they only have one response on this flow, which is that extinction must come first, but this doesn't make any sense. Their disadvantages don't even link to extinction. Also, they say they turned this with a shutdown disadvantage. However, our framing is specific to fighting human trafficking and is not related to structural violence as a whole, so they are unable to turn our framing. Now moving on to T substantial. First, it's hard to measure the number of trafficked people in the U.S. There's no guarantee we won't be able to bring in that many people, and our plan text mandates the expansion of that visa cap substantially. Second of all, it's counterintuitive. A, substantial means large and does not require specification. Watson 2K. Substantial conforms exactly to the dictionary definitions by being ample, considerable in quantity, significantly large, and largely, but not wholly what is specified. When the term substantially is used as an adverb preceding a verb, the term means in a substantial manner so as to be substantial. B. Substantial is not defined by percentage tests. Kindle and Riley, 97. Percentage tests to determine whether activities were substantial obscures the complexity of balancing organizations' activities in relation to its objectives and circumstances. The substantiality issue is a problem that does not lend itself to ready numerical boundaries. And you should prefer our interpretation. Theirs is bad for debate. First, it's completely arbitrary. A case one less under their definition wouldn't be topical, even though it would still meet their standards of limits and ground. Second of all, it's impossible to predict the exact number of people who come in as a result of plan, and trends change over time. Third of all, they over-limit. We lose the ability to debate affirmatives that discuss important groups of immigrants, like victims of trafficking. If they want to win their limits claim, they need to cite specific examples of apps under their interpretation and apps that don't fall under their interpretation. Also, they get ground. The amount of immigrants let in doesn't affect stuff like process counterplans, advantage counterplans, agent counterplans, politics, disadvantages, and topic critiques. And they've shown that in this round that our app is predictable with ground, as they have been prepared for it with specific arguments. Now moving on to T, admission of status. First of all, we meet. New people will be trafficked into the U.S. and will get visas to leave their situation. Second, counterenter. Legal immigration is the process of non-citizens obtaining LPR. This includes new arrivals and adjustment of status, Robinson 10. The INA defines legal immigration as the process by which non-citizens is granted LPR. Legal immigrants include new arrivals to the U.S. and people in the U.S. adjusting their immigrant status to LPR. This latter category includes people who initially arrived as refugees, parolees, temporary migrants, or without authorization, and subsequently qualified for LPR through special provisions or by meeting normal requirements and adjusting status. It's increasingly problematic to identify legal immigration with actual moves to the U.S. and prefer our interpretation. Theirs is just from a website of some random immigration lawyers, whereas ours is actually from the U.S. government Census Bureau. It's much more reliable. And also, cross-play, they overlimit. They prevent core apps that are under the framers' intent as like core novice apps, such as Path to Citizenship for illegals, the DREAM Act, U-Visas, and any app that discusses the U.S.'s over 10 million undocumented residents. And also, once again, there's no impact to this because they've shown they were able to prepare for our case. Now moving on for the deficit disadvantage. First of all, it's completely non-unique. Their uniqueness evidence is from the whitehouse.gov saying how Trump is doing great and he's fixing. However, that's Trump's own website. It's not reliable and you shouldn't listen to it. And unless they can provide better evidence saying that the deficit's actually increasing, which they probably can't, seeing as it's over 100% GDP to deficit ratio right now, you shouldn't buy this dissent. Also, we don't increase funding. We use the same amount of funding allocated right now. It's just that right now it's not being used efficiently. Also, with the shutdown, any compromise is likely to increase funding for border security, which means the deficits will increase inevitably anyways. Also, turn. We increase the economy. Human trafficking has a negative impact on the economy. Human trafficking surged 2013. Besides the huge loss of domestic jobs and human labor, human trafficking negatively impacts the economy, since trafficked persons are deprived of wages or told they have a large debt to pay back to their traffickers. Child labor and commercial sexual exploitation renders entire generations of adults useless in the workforce due to severe trauma and illness from years of abuse. The abused children turn into traumatized adults who depend on the government welfare system to survive. If trafficking successfully ended, then the money spent by governments, international organizations, and NGOs could be used to support other social welfare programs. Now moving on to the shutdown disadvantage. First of all, cross-apply the turn I just read there. It shows we increase the economy, negating their internal link. Next, the plan is overwhelming bipartisan support. Fish 2017. Few issues have as wide bipartisan political support as the issue of trafficking and the protection of its victims. The first major anti-trafficking bill proposed in the U.S. was sponsored by a Republican congressman and eventually led to TVPA with wide bipartisan support. Such bipartisan support has also not waned in the decades since. Second of all, there's no link. The shutdown will be decided by border security, not one anti-trafficking bill. And third of all, the shutdown is unpopular. They won't keep it going for long. Fourth of all, the impact of the shutdown is only temporary. Yes, for a while, some people might not have access to food stamps. However, long term, they get access to back pay. The government has signed into law that all areas that have lost funding will get it retroactively. So these people will get the same amount of money to feed themselves, even if the shutdown lasts a little longer, which it won't. For all these reasons, I can only say about the affirmation. I'm now looking for cross-examination.
Are my judges ready? And then are my opponents ready? All right, thank you.
So to go off the roadmap, it was inherency, harms, T substantial, T adjustment of status, deficits, and then shutdown.
Yeah, solvency and framing were before the T's, but other than that,
Okay,
yeah.
so inherency, harms, solvency, framing, then the rest of it.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you. Could you please read us your harms tags?
from the 1AC.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So first of all, human trafficking is a growing threat throughout the U.S., destroying tens of thousands of lives. And then human trafficking is a fundamental violation of human rights.
All right, thank you. And then for your first response to T substantial, did you say that we meet and it's hard to determine the number of people
Yeah.
being trafficked in the U.S.? So why does your plan raise the cap, or at least estimate the amount of people being infected to be around 3 to 10 times the number of the cap,
Okay.
the cap of the
Uh,
visa?
So again, it's very hard to figure out the number of people being trafficked in the U.S. So we can't actually have specific numbers, which is why the T argument is one that's not a good standard to judge topicality off of, because we can't get specific numbers, especially in instances like this, where these trafficking victims are outside of the eye of society.
Okay, and then you read a card. Do you read a counter-interp in your second response?
Yes, for which T
For
are we talking?
topicality substantial?
Yeah, so there are two cards. First, substantial means large and doesn't require specification, and then substantial is not defined by percentage tests.
All right, thank you. And then for your second attack, or no, sorry, for your second topicality, could we see your responses?
Yeah, I kind of went off the thing. So first of all, we meet, more people are taken in, and when those people are taken in, they will get the status.
Okay, and then
next, we read a source from the U.S. Census Bureau talking about this, how it is defined is just the process of non-citizens gaining LPR. So like an example of that is like passing the DREAM Act. These people are not here legally, then they get LPR.
All right, thank you.
That'd be an example of legal
So
immigration.
can I just provide some context for my next question?
Sure.
So the website we provided for your partner in process was www.justice.gov, which was essentially the website of the Department of Justice. Could you please explain how this is a random immigration law?
Sorry, I guess I must hurt.
All right, no, you're fine, you're fine. And then what were your answers to the deficit DA?
Okay, so first of all, I called out your uniqueness evidence for being literally from Trump's website.
Do you have another card that says differently?
No, but basic like common knowledge is like deficits have been increasing in the past few years, and they are very large right now.
Thank you. Can we get a card for that?
No, and
Thank
I
you.
don't think we
So
need
moving on
one.
to your next attack, did you attack our link or?
Yeah, so
Okay.
the fund, we don't increase funding. If you look at our plan text, we say nothing about funding. We're just using existing funding already allocated for these
Thank you.
people.
And then for your shutdown DA, you were an attack on the link and the
Yeah,
impact.
that's fine.
All right,
But-
thank you.
Can we take some of that?
Can you cut off every 30 seconds, please? Sure. Thank you.
Seconds. A minute.
Okay, stop talking, thank you. Okay, Judges, before I begin with the thank yous, after I read some of my arguments, is it okay if I give my partner's computer back to her? Like, do you mind if I just pick it up and put it back on the table? Okay. Okay. All right, for the thank yous, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone in the Penn speech and debate community. Firstly, our coach, Jimbo, Mr. Brother. Thank you so much for reinvigorating the program and bringing it back from the decline that it was in. Thank you for supporting us and granting us control and having the confidence in us to be so successful this year. Thank you to all of my friends in the speech and debate program for supporting me, and Anya as well when we had a rough day yesterday. So we're here now. Thank you for all of your support. Luke and Oliver. I have no words. Also, shout out to the rest of Indiana Policy. Thank you for making this season very interesting. It's been awesome debating with all you guys. Shout out to Ben and Hattie for making it to finals. And then finally, thank you to Tim Vincent for helping us. Yeah, gonna plug timvince@iu.edu. All right. So with that, the order is going to be T substantial, T adjustment of status, the deficit DA, the shutdown DA, framing, solvency, and then harms. So are all of my judges ready? And then my opponent's ready.
So wait, T substantial, AOS, deficit, shutdown,
yes,
harms, and solvency?
No, yeah, framing, solvency, and harms. Because we clarified in the two cross-sections ago that we were still going to cover more on this.
Okay.
Okay, so with that, everyone ready? Okay, let's begin. First, topicality substantial. Judge, prefer our evidence. It is not difficult to meet this definition. For example, Chinese student visas affect 300,000 people out of 1 million. Using percent tests helps us determine important consequences of the net increase of people or the people that the plan affects. This allows for arguments such as the wages disadvantage. Next, topicality for adjustment of status. Prefer our evidence once again. We post-date them by 2 years, and we cite the INA as well. So when we look at the two topicalities grouped together, it is clear that our standards are not hard to meet. We can give you examples, such as the Chinese student visas, that clearly meet our definitions. It's not hard to be topical to be within the grounds of this resolution. So judges, the reason why you should be voting on topicality is because without being topical, the AF team violates the purpose of debate as a hypothesis testing scenario. In debate, we are supposed to be evaluating both sides of the issue equally and fairly. And by the AF being untopical and being outside of the grounds of the resolution, the negative team, being my partner and I, should not be expected to actually have substantial answers to my opponent's case. So with that, because they violate the basic purpose of debate as a hypothesis testing scenario, it is clear that we must be voting in negation to uphold the fairness of debate and to uphold the possibility of expanding our knowledge on both sides of the issue. So moving on, now onto the deficit disadvantage. I have two responses. Subpoint A, national debt stable now, Trump switching to fiscal conservatism. According to McGill 17, national debt has fallen to a surprising extent. We are undoing the government's rampant spending. It has fell by $102 billion between January 20th and the end of July of 2017 alone. The decline is historically remarkable and is significant when measured against the size of the overall economy. So although my opponents attempt to tell you that the deficit is increasing right now, this is simply false, as we clearly see that based on the statistics of our national debt falling by $102 billion in 7 months, we are clearly not seeing an increase in the national debt. Which leads us to once again reiterate the impact of passing the AF plan, which is subpoint B. National debt will cause slow growth, stagnant wages, and punitive taxes, according to Tully 18. A high debt load will limit our flexibility to keep the economy on an even course. As the debt load grows, efforts by the Federal Reserve to stimulate the economy with lower rates would be more likely to feed runaway inflation. Washington is neglecting the coming crunch, and that should make business leaders plenty worried. Policymakers are digging a deeper hole. So judges, what this is saying is that because the AF plan, as they state in their plan, gives T visas recipients mental health support as well as housing and other social benefits, this causes a drastic spike in the federal government spending. So even though my opponents might try to say that, oh, we're not going to increase the number of spending. You're obviously going to increase the number of spending if there are more people applying for T visas, because if there are more people, you spend more money. It's that simple. So this spike in the spending for recipients of the T visas is going to increase the national debt and will cause slow growth, stagnant wages, and punitive taxes. So for my policymaker judges out there, this is clearly an obvious negative impact, and the AF case is now at a net disadvantage here because they're going to cause slow growth for the economy, which obviously is detrimental to the success of the United States. So now let's move on to the shutdown disadvantage. I have one response. Subpoint A. AF evidence is outdated. The plan will throw a wrench in the reopening negotiations. My opponent stated that in 2017, the plan had bipartisan support. However, since then, a new Congress has been sworn in, and political polarization has skyrocketed exponentially. Note here that it took Congress 35 days of a government shutdown and months of predicting that shutdown due to disagreements on funding to actually reach a 3-week deal. Let's look at how significant that is. If we implement a new immigration plan out of the blue, it's going to derail negotiations by creating an entirely new variable for congressional members to have to negotiate about. So because of this, our link still upholds, and we conclude that by passing the AF plan, we are going to further the government shutdown because these congressional leaders are not going to be able to negotiate a new deal in 3 weeks. So this is going to cause the government to relapse into a shutdown on February 15th. And this, once again, extend my partner's impacts, will cause 40 million Americans to lose their food stamps. Once again, that is clearly a negative impact, and once again, for my policymaker judges out there, that is obviously a net disadvantage. We must be voting in negation to prevent these disadvantages. Next, framing. I have one response. Subpoint A. Prefer neg's framing of this round being based on valuing the greater good. Once again, refers to the shutdown disadvantage. My partner read the impact that 40 million Americans would stop receiving food stamps due to Congress failing to accommodate for the AF plan, which once again throws a wrench in the negotiations. Note at this point, judges, that my opponent's own AF case stated in their harm subpoint A that, quote, more than 20 million victims are affected worldwide by human trafficking. So the 20 million victims for human trafficking is only half the number of people that are going to be affected by the shutdown and the lack of food stamps. We must vote in negation to preserve the greater good, as basic philosophy states that in helping the majority, we enable them to further help the minority. We must be voting on utilitarianism, on preserving the greater good, because when we preserve the greater good, we have a greater amount of people that are able to support the minority in the future. Next, on to solvency. I have 5 responses. Subpoint A. The U.S. is no place for victims of trafficking to seek refuge. Immigrants are most likely to be targeted. According to Ali 17, 7,500 cases of human trafficking were reported in 2016, up from 5,526 in the previous year based on the group's data. As a popular destination for immigrants with multiple international borders, California is one of the largest sites of human trafficking. Texas, another border state, followed behind at 670 cases. Human trafficking will continue to flourish. A majority of victims were trafficked through domestic work or hotel-based employment or agricultural work. So we can see that clearly by allowing immigrants to come to the United States, we are actually going to perpetuate the issue of human trafficking because immigrants are most likely to be targeted. When we think about immigrants, we think that sometimes they will come and they will work, they will do domestic work, they will work in hotels or do agricultural work. So because they're in these lines of their professions, they're going to be impacted more by human trafficking. The AF does not solve for this. They do not, they don't solve for this. Subpoint B. There is a laundry list of all causes to trafficking the AF cannot solve for. According to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe Permanent Council, 2003, trafficking is a complex phenomenon. Political instability, militarism, civil unrest, internal armed conflict, and natural disasters may result in an increase in trafficking. Some parents sell their children, not just for the money, but also in the hope that their children will escape a situation. So what this is saying is that, judges, please note, in the 1AC, my opponent stated that the main issue that they were going to solve was these human trafficking victims not trusting law enforcement. But there are so many more other issues that perpetuate trafficking, such as political instability or natural disasters, which the AF simply cannot solve for. There is absolutely no solvency. They're not actually going to help immigrants. Subpoint C and subpoint D. Plan does not solve because A, human trafficking victims won't speak up, and B, the estimate of the number of victims who need help are far too low. So this is Baker 19, which my partner already read. Subpoint E, Okay, actually with that, I can only see a ballot in negation, and I'm open for cross-ex.
Is everyone ready?
Yes.
All right. Then I'll begin. First of all, can my partners see that last card you read?
Sure.
All right. So.
Here, it doesn't work, so.
So why did the Republicans and Democrats reach a temporary deal for the shutdown?
It was partially because of pressure from their bases.
So
and,
how does plan change that pressure?
Pardon?
How will plan change that pressure?
Okay, so plan might not affect that pressure because obviously Americans don't approve of the government being shut down. But what plan does do is create a new variable for congressional leaders to have to deal with. That is simply not possible in a 3-week period when it already took them months to come to a 3-week solution.
So why would, so you say in your link that this plan will be polarizing. Why would people be against this plan?
Because this plan, when you look at immigration as a whole, it is one of the most hot-button topics in American society.
So you're just saying it's immigration and all immigration is polarizing?
Yes, it is one of the issues where we see the most disagreement among Americans.
Okay, you've only read one card on framing so far, right?
Yes.
Was that the Bostrom evidence talking about extinction first?
Correct.
All right, so when you say in the 2-1C to prefer your framing over ours, are you talking about that same framework of preferring extinction first?
We're not saying extinction first. What my partner was saying is that we need to protect the lives of the future generations. So by protecting the lives of the future generations, we obviously must be preserving the greater good. We must be preserving the support of and the stability of the majority of people.
All right. So on topicality, your impacts are like a loss of fairness in education, right?
Right.
So if the affirmative can prove that we could have had, there hasn't been a loss to fairness or education in this round, or at least there didn't need to have been, does that mean we win T?
No, because you still have to prove that you actually meet our definitions.
Okay. Moving on to the deficit disadvantage. So you read a new piece of evidence saying that Trump has reduced the deficit by $1 billion, right?
Correct.
How much is the deficit total? Do you have any evidence talking about that?
Yes, although, okay.
What percentage of the deficit is that?
I don't have a calculator on me, so I can't tell you.
All right, that's fine. Your impact there is the economy. If we can prove that we boost the economy, does that mean we win the disad?
No, because then we'd still be weighing impacts.
Okay. Now, moving on to framing. So your alley evidence talking about how immigrants are most vulnerable, is that talking about people who are the process of immigration and being taken over, or after they're here?
Do you mean solvency?
On solvency, yeah.
Okay, yeah. This is about when they come to the United States. So after they come to the United States and they get their work, then they're more likely to be prosecuted for trafficking.
Judges, how much prep time do we have left?
2:51.
Could we take 51 seconds of prep then?
Sure.
Yep. Order's just going to be the topicality unsubstantial, topicality on adjustment of status, deficit DA, shutdown DA, and then just framing and then solvency. Almost ready.
Judge, extend our topicality arguments. In fact, prefer our evidence. As my partner stated, it is simply not that difficult to meet our definition. We're just saying 10%. Now, furthermore, we find that topicality goes beyond just this round. This round sets a precedent for what's topical and what's not topical in the future. Not only that, we find that this round, topicality is a voter just beyond fairness in education. It's a voter on preserving fairness for future debate rounds. So moving on to topicality adjustment of status, again, prefer our evidence. We've proven that according to the INA, they simply do not meet. Again, extend our voters. So I'll be moving on to the deficit DA. Concerning the deficit DA, extend our uniqueness card. Not only did they fail to provide Not only did they fail to provide other evidence showing that the deficit is stable now, or that showing that the uniqueness is completely non-unique. We've shown that 2 pieces of evidence show that we are reducing the deficit by either 1 billion or even 3 billion, which according to the White House in 2018 is one of the largest cuts in history. We are making great strides right now, Judge, and we need to preserve the status quo. We need to vote neg to ensure that we don't pass the deficit, to ensure that we don't trigger the deficit DA. Now, our link still holds, Judge. No matter what, this puts them in double bind. Either these victims will not get the help that they need, they will not get the benefits they need, and then they won't link to the DA and they won't be able to claim solvency, or they can link to the DA and claim their solvency because they need these benefits. And furthermore, they're failing to provide a specific number of the economic benefits of passing the plan shows just they don't know how much their plan is going to actually benefit the economy. In fact, they don't even know the number of people affected by their plan. This lack of specificity shows that this is just another reason to not pass the plan. Not only is it vague, it cannot solve. It is like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. Furthermore, we can find that according to Baker 19, since few Americans know how to identify signs of sex trafficking and even fewer victims are likely to call for help, Polaris CEO Bradley Miles said that the number represents only a small fraction of the epidemic's true size. They simply cannot solve for the human trafficking epidemic. Now they can talk to you all they want about all these traumatized people impacting the economy and how much of an impact human trafficking is. But the thing is, they are only digging themselves deeper. The U.S. is not a safe place for human trafficking victims. Extend our solvency all causes. That's Pollock 2010. The actual application process for the T visa may be a reason victims are not willing to participate. Furthermore, we can find that, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place, but furthermore, we can find that when we go to the shutdown DA, this is such a polarizing issue, they haven't attacked Gross 19 at all. They haven't offered a single piece of evidence that postdates ours, and we find that in such a polarizing environment, immigration will push them apart. For example, when President Trump offered the Democrats a deal on TPS and Dreamers, they simply stated it was a non-starter, revealing that Democrats and the GOP are even less likely to compromise than now. Because right now in the status quo, we are seeing them work together on the shutdown. But if we pass the plan, there will be no compromise at all. And furthermore, they haven't attacked our impact at all. Judge, 40 million Americans will be facing an impact that can be easily avoided by voting neg in today's round. With this in mind, I'll be moving on to framing. Judge, continue to extend our framing. We've explained that utilitarian framework prioritizes the lives of many, which helps the lives of the few. By viewing this round in a utilitarian light, we can see that not only do we win on both of our DAs, if you choose to frame the round deontologically, we find that our impact of structural violence for a shutdown DA concerning the food stamps and the lack of ability for poor Americans to be able to feed themselves continues to hold up. Now my opponents state that they're going to be paid again, but the thing is, these food stamps, we are running on a very fragile time frame, Judge. We are running out of time for these Americans to feed themselves. You cannot get paid back if you're busy starving to death. If you're already dead, you cannot get paid back. Judge, you must vote neg based upon the time frame and magnitude of our impact on the shutdown DA. So this month, I'll be moving on to harms. Judge, their own card states that human trafficking is rampant throughout the United States. Even if they do give these victims a T visa, the trafficking will persist. That's their own card, the K. Granger U.S. House of Representatives member 2017. In fact, they didn't highlight this, but I'll read it anyway. Human trafficking isn't something we think of as a major problem in America, but the truth is that adults and youth are being forced into prostitution and unpaid labor in our own backyard. Judge, their own card states that human trafficking is a rampant problem in America. Not only are they unable to identify a number, they cannot explain how they will solve for the amount of people that they don't even know how many people that they're going to affect. Judge, with this in mind, we see that not only is their plan vague and unable to solve, we established several alt causes that overwhelm their ability to solve, and not only have we attacked their framing, we've also prevented 2 disadvantages that completely outweigh, and we've prevented 2 topicality arguments that should be viewed as a priori arguments. So before you make any other decision, ask yourself, do they meet the resolution? And when you've answered that, ask yourself, should we affirm the resolution? Which in this case, I can only say a negative ballot. Thank you.
We'll take some practice.
Is everybody ready? Everyone's ready? Okay. So order's going to be harms, solvency, T substantial, T adjusted status, shutdown disadvantage, deficit disadvantage, and framing. I'll begin. First of all, they have corrupt harms. That means that there's human trafficking is a growing threat. That means that's impacting tens of thousands of people, and it's a violation of human rights. Remember that, Judge. Now let's move on to solvency. They make the attack referring to a grand jury 18 evidence, saying it's happening in our backyard, so it's only in the U.S. Judge, they misunderstand the evidence. They were also talking about other countries that are neighboring to us. It doesn't, just because it says backyard, it doesn't mean literally the United States. And also, they give no, and they say because of this grand jury 18 evidence, there's no reason we can solve. Judge, they give no warrant. They just say it's a just because it's a rampant problem in the status quo, doesn't mean we can't solve the plan. Also, they have 2 arguments that saying they can't speak out for fear, and they are unable to get help from Polaris. Group them together, I'll treat them as one argument. First of all, we solve and we help them speak out. We remove the fear of deportation and the fear of law enforcement that people have, and so we allow them to more speak out. Also, with the increased amount of visas at a time, more people will know about this because increased awareness will come about a larger visa. So we can have more people learning about the T visa and getting help. They also say that immigrants are targeted for the I-18 evidence, but they're talking about temporary visas, not the T visas, so like this doesn't apply to their case. It's also, we solve this by, of course, our entire case giving them social protections, and it's generic and it doesn't link to our case specifically. Also, they say there's alt causes. Prefer our evidence from our entire case because theirs is very old. It's from 2003. Also, it's from Europe, and that's not from the U.S. Also, even though they're just saying there's alt causes to human trafficking, not just to alt causes to, and we're trying to give these victims help first. We're not trying, solving human trafficking is an added advantage. It doesn't as long as we help these victims, you should still vote F. Now let's move on to T substantial. They say prefer their Articles 8, but they give no, because it's not hard to meet, but they give no real warrant as why it's not hard to meet, and their only thing is just an example about Chinese students. Judge, this is not a real argument, you should disregard it. Also, flow through our Watson evidence and our Kendall evidence, sub is large amount and substantial can't be percentage. Also, flow through their standards are arbitrary because immigration changes over time, and also immigration changes over time, and also and it's just an arbitrary number. Also, they do have ground, Judge. They have several disadvantages in Anya, so clearly they have ground to his bait. Now let's move on to T, adjustment of status, immigration. Their only argument to preferring the interpretation is because it postdates. First of all, time doesn't matter for definitions. We still use legal definitions that are decades years old. They also give us no reason why we should prove this time. There's nothing that's changed. They've given us that nothing's changed to make this. Also, prefer Robinson 10. It's from the U.S. Census and it's in the INGA too. Flow-through Ben's argument, this overlimits, and because for novice apps like Dreamers and Pathway to Citizenship are not allowed under their interpretation of topicality. Judges, it's the framer's intent for the novice topics to be topical. Let's move on to the shutdown disadvantage. Their only argument is that our Fish 18 evidence is outdated. First of all, this is referring to historical evidence over time, starting in 2000 when the TVPA was first announced. And second of all, they don't provide alternate evidence. They just say it's outdated, so you just should ignore. For our evidence, it's both specific and reliable. Flow through, there's no link because they don't. It's just debates about border security, and the shutdown's unpopular, so it's unlikely to say. We do attack their thing. And the shutdown's only temporary, so it's unlikely that their effects will be seen. Now let's move on to the deficit disadvantage. Going down by a little bit is not matter. Our deficit's in the trillions. Also, they say that we increase spending. They've never proved we increase spending. It's in our plan. Don't let them say what our own plan is. We have a budget and it's perfectly fine. It's $43 million. That's good enough to help these people. And they say we are in a double bind because they don't get net benefits or lose solvency. We're not in a double bind. There's enough funding to support these people, and they will solve. Let's move on to framing. They give us no real warrant for why you should prefer a utilitarian argument. They just say because it's the greater good. And the framework, even though their framework is talking about extinction, and also because they're running no arguments that link to extinction, you should prefer framing. Human rights outweighs. Thank you.
Yeah, and then could one of the judges count off every 30 seconds, please? Thank you.
Seconds left. Time.
Okay, judges, the order is going to be harms, T substantial, T adjustment of status, the deficit DA, the shutdown DA, framing, and then solvency. And then I'll be doing voters briefly at the end if I have time, but I should be covering it throughout this speech. So are all my judges ready? And then...
Framing then solvency?
Yes, framing and solvency. Okay, so judges ready? And then opponents ready? Okay. Let's begin. First, topicality substantial. Judge, not only did we satisfy the request for an example, we've explained that percent tests are necessary. We have provided you with examples of plans that are topical, such as the Chinese student visa immigration, which states that out of the 1 million immigrants in the United States per year, the number of 300,000 is substantial. That is an example of a topical act. It is not hard to meet. Because my opponents still fail to meet this definition, they violate the purpose of debate as being a hypothesis testing scenario. So once again, prioritize this as an a priori issue. If they are not topical, we should not be debating it under this resolution. That is not the purpose of today's round. Now let's move on to T, adjustment of status. Immigration reform is mercurial and constantly shifting to adapt to patterns of movement. Prefer our definition, not just because it postdates, but it clearly defines what's topical and what is not. Furthermore, we've also explained how adjustment of status of people already in the United States allows the AF team to spike out of key net ground. This resolution also focuses on the net increase of people in the United States. Refer to H-1B visas as a key example, or even EB-5 visas. Furthermore, the framers' intent isn't even clear. They don't have any evidence stating that the NSDA included this specifically to state that topicality, immigration adjustment of status, is topical. Topicality is an important argument for novices to learn and adapt to, and without a specific piece of evidence from the NSDA itself, TAOS flows to neg based upon our standards. So judges, once again, topicality is a critical stock issue. It is a priority because my partner and I have proven that they simply violate our definitions. They do not meet our standards, and thus they violate the purpose of debate as being a hypothesis testing scenario. We don't get to evaluate the issue of human trafficking on fair ground. Vote in negation to protect the fairness of debate. Now let's move on to the deficit disadvantage. We clearly prove that there is a net disadvantage here because my opponent's own 1AC states that funding is done through normal means. Judges, normal means that they have to rely upon the United States budget and draw from that deficit. So we can see that with the deficit disadvantage, my partner and I have proven that we are currently decreasing the deficit. However, by spending money on the plan, because they have normal means, they have to be drawing from the deficit. And due to the deficit increasing, the national debt will skyrocket and we will see a decline in wages, we will see a decline in economic growth. This is obviously detrimental to the state of the United States and is the reason why you must be voting in negation. Protect the economy, let's keep it strong. Now, let's move on to the shutdown disadvantage. My partner and I have proven to you that the AF plan is a new variable in the government reopening negotiations. It's basic logic that immigration is a hot-button topic in the US and is one of the most polarized topics in society. This is going to derail negotiations and prevent congressional members from reaching a solution by the three-week deadline. As my partner read in Gulshan 19, a shutdown will cause 40 million Americans to lose access to food stamps and effectively cause them to starve. This is clearly a net deficit in today's round. So judges, weigh this impact on magnitude because the 40 million Americans affected by this completely outweighs the number of people affected by human trafficking. As my opponent stated, they are only going to give approximately 50,000 visas. This is compared to 40 million Americans starving. We must vote in negation to preserve the safety of these Americans and prevent them from starving. Next, framing. Pull through our framing because we address a wider range of impacts in both the number of people affected and the card that my partner read in protecting future generations. We advocate for utilitarianism, which is valuing the greater good. As my partner and I have both stated already, the 40 million number of Americans affected by the government shutdown due to their losses of food stamps is far more significant than the maximum of 20 million people affected by the human trafficking epidemic across the world. So because we are protecting and supporting a greater number of people, this enables them, the majority, to in turn step up and help the minority. Utilitarianism is the way to go, judges. Next, solvency. We have proven that there is a litany of alternative causes that my opponents simply do not address for. Firstly, to clarify, our Ali 17 evidence stating that immigrants are specifically targeted when they are in the United States does not mention at all that it is not a permanent visa. There's nothing about it. It's just stating that these immigrants, because of the line of work that they are in, are going to be subjected to more human trafficking. The app does not adjust for this. Furthermore, we should still be considering our OSCE 2003 card because the state of Europe is very similar societally to the United States. It is very comparable and is a reliable source. So because my opponents don't address things like political instability or natural disasters, then they simply do not solve. They don't address all the issues. So we must vote in negation. There are better ways to do the plan. Thank you.
We'll take the remainder of our prep.
246. There's a second room.
So the order is just generally weighing the round at first, and then starting off with like solvency, topicality, in the order of substantial adjustment of status, the shutdown disad, the deficits disad, and then framing. Is everyone ready? Alright, then I'll begin. In my opinion, the affirmative is winning this debate. The first reason of this is the affirmative case. The negative has completely conceded the harms and inherency, the problems in the status quo, and the problems with the restrictions that we remove and solve for. And on solvency, they've done very little work to show that we won't solve. And as I'll show later, there's a high chance that we're actually going to be able to fix this problem of trafficking in the U.S. and at the very least help some victims, which is enough to show we solve. Also, Mr. Smith, you said you're a stock issues judge. We're going to be winning, we definitely win harms and inherency, and I'll show we'll be winning solvency and topicality. You can vote F on that. And for you policymakers, we'll be showing that our plan is a pragmatic solution to this problem and outweighs the disadvantages. On solvency, they only have 2 responses in their last speak. First of all, they try and extend their alley evidence, saying that immigrants taken into the U.S. are more vulnerable. However, and they try and link out of our Hattie's last argument, saying that this is talking about temporary visas, saying that's not what it's talking about at all. However, the evidence is specifically talking about immigrants working in specific areas that fall under temporary work visas. That is what we apply. And we have solved for that by giving them permanent residence. Second of all, we are able to solve for immigrants, even if they're still trafficked into the U.S., by providing them these social services. The negative hasn't contested this the entire round. Next, they extend their OSCE alt cause evidence and saying it still applies. First of all, once again, it's from 2003, 16 years ago. The problems people in these situations are facing 16 years ago aren't necessarily the same as today. And second of all, they've given no warrant as how problems in Europe apply to the US. And third of all, even if people continue to be trafficked, at the very least, we solve for protecting the victims of trafficking. Now, on to T. Judge, the topicality arguments of the negatives will both fail. They've failed to address key arguments on each flow, such as our interpretations and reasons to prefer ours. And also, their impacts are simply false. The round shows that they have had ground to run against their case and limits to prepare for it. First with T substantial. Extend our interpretation that substantial is just a large amount, and percentage tests don't determine substantial. They haven't really given a reason why this is bad the entire round, other than saying that they can meet their definition, but never given a warrant for exactly how it is easy to meet their definition. Also, they've conceded that their definition, or their interpretation of the topic is bad, because it overlimits and leaves us to a few stale apps that lead to bad debates. Now moving on to adjustment of status. Extend our interpretation from Robinson 10. This specifically cites the Immigration and Nationality Act. They say they post-date what matters, but they've never given you a warrant why the date of a definition matters, so you don't buy that argument. Also, our interpretation is clearly better. For the framers' intent, the people who determined the topic, wanted us to debate affirmatives such as the DREAM Act or path to citizenship, people who are already here but don't have legal status. The way the topic is designed is to talk about these important issues of the undocumented in our country, which our plan does. And once again, they get ground. There's no abuse on this flow. Now moving on to the shutdown disadvantage. Their link this round is that our plan is immigration, and that is controversial. However, their link is completely generic and have not given you a specific reason why our plan particularly will be controversial. While we've read evidence saying that the plan is bipartisan. To my knowledge, there's no one who's pro-human trafficking in Congress, and no one wants to be seen as the person who is against anti-trafficking legislation. It's not going to be polarizing to do a common-sense solution to this problem. Also, even if you don't buy that, extend the conceded argument by the negative that there's no link. The shutdown is about border security, not about human trafficking. And even if you don't buy that, the impact is temporary. The government won't be shut down forever, and these people will get their food stamps long term. Now moving on to the deficit disadvantage. Their link here is that we increase funding, but don't let the neg determine our plan. We know our plan best, we wrote it. Nowhere in our plan do we say that we mandate an increase in funding. They say we, through normal means, increase funding, but we don't do that. There's actually already funding allocated to these trafficking victims. It's just not being used. We're not changing that. Also, the disadvantage doesn't even matter. Their uniqueness evidence says Trump has reduced it by $1 billion. However, the deficit is upwards of $10 trillion. That's not nearly enough to trigger any impact. And if you don't believe that, extend our turn that we actually boost the economy. Because we've won the stock issues and are clearly topical, and their disadvantages don't link, I can only see an affirmative ballot in today's debate. Thank you.